So a few years ago, I got interested in the early history of the Dutch coming to the Cape. And that was in the 17th century, and I went to museums and I looked in books, and I looked at the paintings that were being made by the Dutch at that time. And one of the things that I saw a lot of were paintings that looked pretty much like this. They were flower arrangements set against a dark background. They were very popular. And as I started looking more deeply into our local history, obviously one of the things that I had to come up against was the fact that when the Dutch arrived, the Cape was already richly peopled and very richly cultured. There were many different people living here, and there was already a very rich culture and a rich politics and a very rich, very ancient life at the Cape already. And that got me thinking. And when I looked at these Dutch flower arrangement paintings, I noticed that the flowers in them were typically flowers that came from all over the world, because the Dutch at that time in the 17th century were people who had ships. They were, one of the biggest seafaring nations at the time, and they traveled to all four corners of the globe. And one of the things they loved to do was bring back plants to Holland and then grow them in Holland. And so the flowers in the pictures were typically flowers that came from all over the world. And it got me thinking, because one of the things that I discovered living here in the Cape is that many of the flowers that grow in our gardens and in our public spaces also come from other parts of the world. But before the Dutch arrived, before the 17th century, for thousands, if not millions of years, we'd had plants growing here, flowering plants growing here in the Cape, in the sand and on the mountain, and on the Cape Flats. We had some of the most diverse biodiversity in the world. We already had so many flowering plants here in the Cape already. And as the centuries went by since the Dutch arrived, and then the English coming and other Europeans, we started to lose touch with the plants that originally grew here. And what has happened now is that those plants, of which there are many, 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 many species, they're now becoming extinct. And although we are the most biodiverse city in the world because of our floral richness, we are also the extinction capital now, because we're losing so many species in the Cape regularly. And when I say the Cape, I mean here, literally in Cape Town where I live, maybe a 30k radius. And so I started getting interested in perhaps making artworks that looked like these Dutch flower paintings, but instead of having plants that came from other parts of the world, they would only have flowers that came from here in Cape Town, and plants that would have grown here thousands, if not millions of years ago. Not only flowers, but also insects. And I'm looking for some insects now. There's one here. And not only insects and flowers, but also shells. So there's some shells here from our local shores. And not only those, but also vessels. So the vases that would have been used in the Dutch flower arrangements, I wanted to work with vessels that would have been made here at the Cape before the Dutch arrived. And so I started looking for potential examples of what the Khoikhoi people might have made. And then somebody made a wooden vessel for me that was based on drawings of Khoi vessels that were made a little bit later than the Dutch period. And so all of the flowers that you see here are flowers that are indigenous to Cape Town. And they were very, very difficult to find. Many of them are rare, and some of them are close to extinction. And I made 6 of these pictures. They're photographs, they're not paintings. They're made to look like paintings, but they're actually very detailed photographs that have then been photoshopped to look a little bit more like the Dutch paintings that they're based on. But not a single thing here comes from any other part of the world other than Cape Town. And as I say, getting the flowers meant getting to know farmers and gardeners and national gardens all around the Cape, and getting hold of them long before spring, and starting to get a sense of what might be flowering by looking at flower books. And then when spring arrived, I had 3 days to collect the flowers before they wilted. And then I worked with a flower designer called Christopher Peter, and he arranged the flowers for me. And I worked with a photographer called Tony Mankis, and he took the photographs and did the retouching. So I actually didn't even physically make the pictures, even though I conceptualized them. And this was the result. So the work has been shown all over the world. It was made as an edition. If I remember correctly, it was an edition of 6 or 8, which means that of the 6 pictures that I made, there were 6 to 8 copies of each of them that were available for sale. The South African government bought a set. I just can't remember now who has these pictures, but they're all sold, and that was a lot of pictures that sold, and they've gone into some of the world's top museums and some of the world's top collections, and have been shown all over the world. They were very warmly received, I think, and especially here in South Africa, because these plants are increasingly becoming loved by people because so many of our local resources are threatened now, our indigenous and native resources, whether those are cultural or material or natural. And so there was a very warm reception in South Africa.